This is the $5,000 fine the HOA slapped me with for my noisy power plant. That's Karen, the HOA president, who told me the quiet hum, keeping my neighbor's oxygen machine running, was unauthorized industrial equipment. She threatened to tear down the very system my wife asked me to build before she passed, all while wearing this smug little smirk. But while she was busy playing God with a clipboard, she had no idea her little piece of paper just gave me the perfect revenge plan to cut the electricity off and plunge her world into total darkness. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because this takedown is glorious. And if you believe no HOA should have the power to put lives at risk, hit that subscribe button. You're about to watch what happens when they mess with a real electrician. The knock on my front door came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of quiet day where the loudest sound on our cul-de-sac was my grandson's remote-controlled truck buzzing over the driveway cracks. I was in the garage, soldering a loose wire on that very truck, the scent of hot metal and flux, a familiar comfort. At 68, you learn to appreciate the small fixes. My daughter Rachel was at work, and the grandkids were inside, so I figured it was just a delivery. Wiping my hands on a rag, I pulled open the door, and my stomach tightened. It was Karen Halbridge, our HOA president, standing on my porch with a clipboard held to her chest like a shield. She had that thin, tight smile she wore when she was about to ruin someone's day. It was a smile that said, "I have the authority, and you don't." Behind her, I could see Mrs. Gable across the street, pretending to water her petunias, her eyes fixed right on us. This wasn't a friendly visit, it was a public performance. "Tom," Karen said, her voice dripping with fake politeness, "we need to discuss a serious compliance issue." She didn't wait for an invitation, just handed me a crisp envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the HOA letterhead. My eyes scanned the text, but the numbers jumped out first. $5,000. The words swam into focus next. Fine for mechanical noise pollution. I looked up from the paper, then back at her, completely baffled. My garage, where the heart of my power system lived, was right behind me. The only sound coming from it was the whisper-quiet hum of an inverter, a sound quieter than the refrigerator in my kitchen. "Noise pollution?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Karen, my system is practically silent. It's fully permitted by the city. You know this." She just tilted her head, the smile never wavering. "The board has received complaints about the constant hum from your unauthorized industrial installation," she said, savoring those last 3 words like they were a delicacy. It was then that I understood. This had nothing to do with noise. This was about control. This was about the little kingdom she ran from her 2-story house at the end of the block. I tried to reason with her, to appeal to the person I hoped was still buried under all those bylaws. "Karen," I said, pointing 2 doors down to Steve Morales' house. "Last summer, when the grid went down for 8 hours, this installation kept his oxygen machine running. It powered his house and 6 others. It might have saved his life for a flicker of a second. I thought I saw a crack in her composure, but it vanished as quickly as it came. While your generosity is noted," she said, her voice turning hard and clinical, "it does not supersede association bylaws. The equipment is non-compliant." She tapped her pen on the clipboard. "Furthermore, running a private utility is a liability to the neighborhood." She was just reciting words from a script she'd written in her head, a script where she was the hero, protecting property values from a rogue electrician. The neighbors were still watching. Mr. Henderson had stopped mowing his lawn. The performance was for them as much as it was for me, a warning to anyone else who might step out of line. "So what Steve's wife told me, that you called it a fire hazard, that was a lie?" I asked. Karen's eyes narrowed. "I will be reporting your unauthorized grid modifications to both County Code Enforcement and the Public Utility Commission," she threatened, her voice low. They may find your setup isn't quite as legal as you think. It was a bluff, and we both knew it. My system was isolated. It couldn't backfeed the main grid, and every permit was filed in a thick binder on my desk. But the threat was clear. Fall in line, or I will make your life a living hell. She turned to leave, her work done. As I watched her walk away, my gaze drifted to the closed garage door. Behind it wasn't just wires and batteries, it was a promise. My late wife, Sarah, had been terrified during that big ice storm blackout 5 years ago. We were without power for 3 days. The cold was one thing, but the silence, the darkness, it got to her. A few months before she passed, she sat with me in the garage while I was tinkering. She put her hand on mine and said, "Build it, Tom. Build us something they can't turn off. So you and Rachel and the kids are never in the dark again." So I did. I poured every bit of my Navy training into it. It wasn't just a project. It was the last thing I could ever do for her. Karen's fine wasn't just a piece of paper. It was an insult to Sarah's memory. It was an attempt to dismantle the one thing that made me feel like I could still protect my family. Anger began to simmer beneath my grief, hot and clean. But I was a man who believed in process. I believed that reason, if presented clearly, had to win. That night, I sat down at my old wooden desk. I pulled out the city permits, the schematics, the noise level readings I'd taken myself that registered lower than a quiet library. I wrote a formal appeal to the HOA board, my handwriting neat and steady. I explained the system's safety features, its purpose, and included signed letters from the 7 families it served, all of them thanking me for the peace of mind I'd given them. I laid out the facts, clear and simple. I believed in the system, not just my system of batteries and wires, but the system of rules and appeals. I put it all in an envelope and dropped it in the HOA's Dropbox the next morning, feeling a small surge of hope. Surely, the other board members would see the absurdity of it. That hope lasted exactly 4 days. I was in the front yard pulling a few stray weeds when I saw her, Karen, marching up my driveway again. This time, she wasn't carrying a clipboard. She was carrying a hammer and a laminated piece of paper. She didn't say a word to me. She walked right past me, straight to my garage door, and with 2 sharp, loud bangs, she nailed a notice right onto the middle panel for the entire neighborhood to see. My appeal had been rejected. The notice was stark. Final order to remove non-compliant machinery. It gave me 7 days. 7 days to tear down my wife's last wish, or the HOA would begin fining me $500 a day until I complied. I stood there, staring at the white paper tacked to my home, the nailheads glinting in the afternoon Sunday. The message was unmistakable. This was never about noise. It wasn't about rules. It was about power, and I had just been shown in the most public way possible that I had none. I started with the neighbors, the ones whose lights stayed on when the rest of the block went dark. I thought, if we all stood together, if we presented a united front, what could she do? I was wrong. I knocked on the Miller's door first. Mr. Miller opened it just a crack, his face pale. I explained the situation, told him I was fighting the fine, and asked if he'd be willing to sign a petition, maybe speak at the next board meeting. He just shook his head, looking over his shoulder as if Karen might materialize in his living room. "Tom, we can't," he whispered. "She fined us $300 last month because our recycling bin was visible from the street 2 hours before pickup. We just paid it. We can't afford to get on her bad side again." He looked genuinely sorry, then quietly closed the door. It was the same story at the next house and the next. People were supportive in whispers. They'd corner me by the mailbox and say, "What she's doing is criminal, Tom." But when I asked them to put their name on a piece of paper, they suddenly had to go. The phone was ringing. The dog needed walking. Karen had them all terrified. She'd built a kingdom on $500 fines for untrimmed shrubs and parking with your tires an inch on the grass. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was bleeding them dry, one petty violation at a time. and they were too scared to fight back. My last stop was Steve's house. I found him in his garage, tinkering with a lawnmower engine, his movements slow and deliberate since the stroke. His wife, Maria, let me in, her eyes filled with worry. I told him what happened, how the neighbors were too scared to help. Steve just wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me, his gaze steady. Come back to my place, I said. I want to show you the schematics. Show you that this thing is safer than the wiring in her own house. A few minutes later, we were standing in my garage, the soft green and amber lights of the control panel glowing on the wall. The battery banks were lined up neat and clean, each wire labeled, each connection triple-checked. It was a work of pride. Steve ran a shaky hand over the cool metal casing of the main inverter. When the power went out last summer, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I didn't even know at first. The TV just stayed on. The light in the kitchen stayed on. He turned to face me, and I saw the fear he'd been hiding. My oxygen concentrator never missed a beat. Maria. She sits up at night during storms, just waiting for the lights to flicker. Scared she'll wake up and I'll be. He couldn't finish the sentence. His shoulders slumped. This tough old army vet, who could strip down a Jeep engine blindfolded, was breaking down in my garage. If she makes you tear this out, Tom, I don't know what we'll do. I'll feel like a prisoner in my own home again, just waiting for the next outage. In that moment, this stopped being about my pride or a fine. It was about Steve's next breath. I had to try the official route one last time. I took my binder of permits and plans down to the city inspector's office. The guy behind the counter, a tired-looking man named Frank, looked over my paperwork with a practiced eye. He nodded, slowly. This is clean work, Mr. Carson, he said, handing the binder back. Permits are all in order. Your load calculations are spot on. As far as the city is concerned, you're a model citizen. He then leaned forward, lowering his voice. Off the record? He said. Your HOA president has been calling my office 3 times a day. And off the record, he continued, what she's doing is absurd. But your neighborhood covenants give the HOA board broad authority over nuisances. A judge would probably say that a noise complaint, even a bogus one, falls under their purview. They're technically legal, even if they're morally bankrupt. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied. It was a punch to the gut. The law, the real law, was on my side, but it didn't matter. In Karen's little kingdom, the only law that mattered was the one written in the HOA's book of rules. She wasn't done. 2 days later, a man I'd never seen before showed up at my door. He was short and stout, wearing a cheap blazer with an HOA compliance patch sewn on the breast. This was Greg Foster, Karen's new vice president. A guy who used to be a mall cop and now acted like he was a federal agent. I'm here to conduct an official sound level reading, he announced, holding up a small, yellow decibel meter like it was a weapon. I stepped aside and let him into the garage. He was all business, fumbling with the device. I watched him closely. I've worked with sensitive electronic equipment my whole life. I know how it operates. I saw him turn the device on. I saw the screen flash to life. And then, a full 5 seconds after it was on and stabilized, I saw him press the button to start the official recording. He caught the device's initial power-on electrical spike, not the ambient noise. It was a classic trick, designed to create a false high reading. Clipboard theater. He held the meter up for 30 seconds, the number on the screen an impossible fabrication, then clicked it off with a flourish. As I suspected, he said gravely, scribbling on his clipboard, well above the acceptable limit. He didn't look me in the eye once. He was just a puppet, and Karen was pulling the strings. I just stood there, watching him walk away, my mind a blank slate of cold, quiet fury. For 2 weeks, I had tried reason. I had tried logic. I had tried appealing to my neighbor's courage and the city's common sense. And I was answered with fear, bureaucracy, and finally, pathetic, outright fraud. The laminated notice on my garage door seemed to mock me. My daughter, Rachel, had been right. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted a surrender. That evening, I stood in the quiet of my garage, the gentle hum of the inverters a comforting presence. This system was more than just a machine. It was a promise to my wife, a lifeline to my neighbors, and a testament to a lifetime of skilled work. They wanted to rip it out because of a noise that wasn't there. They called it a nuisance. They didn't understand. The noise wasn't the problem. The quiet was. Standing there, a new kind of resolve settled over me. It wasn't hot, like anger. It was cold and clear, like a circuit diagram. They wanted quiet. They were about to get it. I looked at the main cutoff switch, the big red handle that could de-energize my entire creation. She wants quiet? Let's see how quiet it gets when the lights go out. My war started not with a bang, but with a click. The click of a camera shutter. The click of a pen on a fresh page of a legal pad. I started documenting everything. Karen Halbridge's car driving slowly past my house at 8:14 a.m., Greg Foster, the mall cop, loitering by my mailbox at noon, pretending to be on his phone. I took photos of the laminated notice on my garage, its edges starting to curl in the Oklahoma Sunday. I bought a small, discreet digital audio recorder and left it in a planter by my front door. It caught every word of her next visit. "Mr. Carson," she'd called out from the sidewalk, not even bothering to walk up to the door. Day 3. The fines are accumulating. Are you ready to be a cooperative member of this community yet? The condescension in her voice was a physical thing. I just nodded politely from the doorway, letting her think I was a beaten old man. Let them build their case. I was busy building mine. The escalation came on a Friday. A white van, with a generic general contracting logo, pulled up to my curb. A man in a stained work shirt got out, clipboard in hand. It seemed to be the official weapon of the HOA. "I'm here to perform a structural and electrical safety inspection of the non-compliant installation," he announced. I stood in the doorway, blocking his path. "I didn't schedule an inspection," I said calmly. "Who sent you?" He grunted, tapping his clipboard. "The homeowners association." "Well, the homeowner says you're not coming in," I replied. "This is private property." He wasn't used to that. He flushed red and stammered, "This is an official HOA action. We have the right to inspect for bylaw violations." I knew he was bluffing. Their authority ended at my front door, unless they had a court order. "Then you can show me the court order," I said, and gently closed the door in his face. I watched through the peephole as he stomped back to his van and made a furious phone call. 5 minutes later, Karen's car screeched to a halt behind the van. She marched up to my door, this time with Greg Foster flanking her like a low-budget Secret Service agent. "Mr. Carson," she yelled through the door, "refusing a compliance inspection is another violation. We are escalating this to county enforcement." I didn't answer. I just took a picture of them through the window, the enraged HOA queen and her loyal pawn, standing impotent on my lawn. They could scream all they wanted. They weren't getting in. The neighborhood felt different after that. A chill had set in. People who used to wave now just gave a tight-lipped nod and hurried inside. I saw Maria, Steve's wife, crying while she checked her mail one afternoon. The Parkers, a young couple 2 houses down, put up a for sale sign and were gone within a week. The house sat empty, a silent casualty of Karen's reign. My own home started to feel like a fortress under siege. My daughter, Rachel, was worried sick. She came over one evening, her face etched with anxiety. "Dad, this is getting out of hand," she said, gesturing toward the window as if Karen might be listening. "She's not going to stop. You need to call the local news, get a lawyer, something." I shook my head. "Not yet, honey," I told her. "The timing has to be perfect. You don't fire your biggest gun until you've got them right in your sights." She didn't understand. She saw a stubborn old man picking a fight he couldn't win, a fight that could spill over onto her and my grandkids. "What if they try to put a lien on the house?" she pressed. "What if they find some other way to hurt us?" For a split second, I faltered. I looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, and thought about dismantling the whole thing. Maybe it wasn't worth it. Maybe protecting my family meant surrendering. I could just take it all apart, pay the fine, and let Karen have her quiet little kingdom. The thought left a bitter, coppery taste in my mouth, the taste of defeat. But then my phone rang. It was Maria. Her voice was frantic, trembling. "Tom, it's Steve," she choked out. The power blinked. It was only for a minute, but his breathing, it got shallow. The alarm on his machine went off. I called 911. She was sobbing now. "He had a mild heart attack, Tom. The ambulance was late getting here because of the roadwork on the main street." My blood ran cold. A 1-minute outage. A minor flicker that most people wouldn't even notice. To Steve, it was a brush with death. The doctor said he'd be okay, but it was a brutal reminder of how fragile his life was and how much he depended on the steady, uninterrupted flow of electricity my system provided. My momentary doubt evaporated, replaced by a granite-hard certainty. This was never about a hobby in my garage. It was never just about a fine or a power-hungry woman with a clipboard. This was about life and death. Karen's crusade wasn't just petty, it was dangerous. My fight wasn't just for my property rights, it was for my neighbor's life. That night, after Rachel and the kids had gone to bed, I went out to the garage. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and ozone. The green and amber lights of the control panel were like steady heartbeats in the dark. I took a deep breath, walked over to the main wall unit, and opened the heavy steel door of the master control box. Inside was a large, red-handled breaker switch, labeled System Main. It was the kill switch, the one I'd installed as a final, catastrophic failsafe. Taking it down would be like stopping a beating heart. With a steady hand, I gripped the handle. I wasn't dismantling it to surrender. I was preparing for something else. A strategic shutdown. A necessary sacrifice before the real power move. With a loud, definitive clunk, I pulled the lever down. The hum of the inverters died. The glowing lights winked out one by one, plunging the garage into absolute silence and darkness. The silence in the garage felt wrong, like a missing limb. But it was a necessary darkness. My plan required precision, not just power. For the next few nights, after Rachel and the kids were asleep, my garage became my workshop again. I worked under a single battery-powered lamp, the quiet focus reminding me of late nights on a ship, deep in the engine room, with nothing but the hum of the turbines and the problem in front of me. I unspooled old Navy schematics on my workbench. Diagrams I knew better than the streets of my own town. The beauty of the system I'd built for Sarah wasn't just its strength, but its flexibility. It was a modular design, built from recycled server racks and surplus deep-cycle batteries I'd bought at auction. It was over-engineered, with redundancies and fail-safes. I hadn't just built a power plant, I'd built an instrument, and now I was going to learn to play it. My first task was surgical. I bypassed the main inverter's diagnostic speaker, the source of the minuscule hum Karen had declared a nuisance. Then, I rerouted a few key circuits, adding a new remote-activated relay I'd salvaged from an old HVAC unit. It was a small, unassuming black box, but it was the key. With this, I could create a silent run test mode. A way to have the system fully armed and ready to deploy without making a single sound. More importantly, it gave me a new level of control. I could now isolate and direct power with the push of a button on a simple remote I kept in my pocket. I wasn't just turning the power on or off for everyone. I could now choose who got power. The work was slow and meticulous. Stripping wires, crimping new connectors, soldering them into place with a steady hand. Every connection was a quiet act of defiance. Every tightened screw was a small victory. This wasn't destruction. It was refinement. I was weaponizing the very thing she'd tried to destroy. Meanwhile, Karen was celebrating her victory tour. The day after my system went dark, she posted in the official HOA Facebook group, It was a picture of my closed garage door, the laminated notice still tacked to it. The caption read, "Great news for our community. The non-compliant industrial machinery on Oakwood Court has been deactivated. Thank you for your patience as we work to restore our neighborhood's peace and quiet. Number compliance is key." The comments section filled up with praise from her little clique of followers. "Thank you for your tireless work, Karen. So glad our property values are being protected." I read each one, a cold calm settling over me. They were dancing on the grave of a project they didn't even understand. They had no idea the patient was just in surgery, being fitted with a new, stronger heart. A few days later, the other shoe dropped. A real, official-looking notice was taped to my front door. Not from the HOA, but from the county. It was a summons. Karen had made good on her threat. She'd filed a formal complaint with county code enforcement, citing her faked noise level report and my refusal to allow an inspection. A court hearing was scheduled for the end of the month. My heart hammered against my ribs for a second. This was real. This was the system I'd once trusted, now being turned against me. Rachel saw it when she came home, and her face went white. "Dad, this is what I was afraid of," she said, her voice shaking. "We need a lawyer, right now. This is a court summons." I put a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, honey," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't fully feel. "It's a bluff. A hearing is just a hearing. Let her have her day in court. I'll have mine." That night, under the cover of darkness, I made my rounds. My plan needed one more element: trust. I went to each of the 7 houses my system powered, starting with Steve's. He was back from the hospital, looking pale but resolute. I sat with him and Maria in their kitchen, the air thick with the scent of coffee and antiseptic. I didn't tell them the whole plan, just what they needed to know. "My system is offline for now," I said quietly. "But it's not gone. I need to ask you for a favor, a big one. I need you to trust me. Don't tell anyone what I'm about to say." They both nodded, their eyes wide. "Wednesday night," I continued. "The HOA has its monthly meeting at the clubhouse. Be ready around 8 p.m. Just be ready." I didn't explain what for. I couldn't. But I saw in Steve's eyes that he understood. He saw the same quiet determination that a soldier sees in another before a mission. I got the same nod, the same unquestioning agreement from the 6 other families. They were scared, but their fear of Karen was finally being eclipsed by their trust in me. As I walked home, the remote relay in my pocket felt heavy with the weight of that trust. The stage was set. Karen was about to give the performance of her life at the HOA meeting, celebrating her victory over the old man with the noisy garage. She had no idea she was the star of a much different show, and I was in the director's chair. Wednesday night arrived heavy and humid, the kind of evening where the air itself seems to be holding its breath. I sat in my living room, watching the clock on the wall. 7:45 p.m. Rachel and the kids were upstairs, thinking I was just reading the paper. In my pocket, my thumb rested on the cool plastic of the remote. It had 2 buttons, one big, one small. On a laptop next to me, I had a live feed pulled up, the private live stream of the HOA monthly meeting. Karen insisted on broadcasting them, another monument to her own importance. I could see her now, sitting at the head of a long folding table in the community clubhouse, beaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was dressed in a power suit, a gavel in her hand, ready to preside over her kingdom. The meeting started with the usual tedious business: budget approvals, a debate about what kind of mulch to use in the common areas. I fast-forwarded through the nonsense, my eyes fixed on the agenda posted on the wall behind her. Item number 4. Community Compliance and Safety Update. That was my cue. At 7:59 p.m., she tapped her gavel. "And now," she announced, her voice echoing slightly through the clubhouse microphone, "I am very pleased to provide an update on a significant safety issue that has been resolved this month." She paused for dramatic effect. looking around at the 24 or so residents in attendance. As many of you know, we have been dealing with an unauthorized, unpermitted, and dangerously noisy industrial installation. My thumb pressed the big button. The effect was instantaneous and total. The lights in the clubhouse didn't flicker. They vanished. The microphone squealed once and died. Karen's face, frozen mid-smugness on my laptop screen, was plunged into absolute blackness. The live stream cut out, but my work wasn't done. From my chair, I could see out the front window. Up and down our street, every house, every porch light, every street light blinked out of existence. A collective, rolling blackout. The entire block was plunged into the kind of profound darkness you only get far out in the country. A few seconds of shocked silence followed. Then I could hear the faint, confused shouts from down the street. It was 8:01 p.m. I waited a beat, counting slowly to 10. Then, my thumb moved to the small button. One by one, like beacons being lit in the night, 7 houses on our block flickered back to life. My house, Steve's house, the Millers. A perfect constellation of light in an ocean of black. My laptop screen remained dark, but my phone buzzed. It was a text from Steve's daughter Sarah, who I knew was at the meeting. It just said, "Showtime." Inside the clubhouse, chaos had erupted. The emergency lights, which were supposed to kick on, had failed. A testament to the HOA's actual commitment to safety. People were fumbling for their phones, their flashlight beams cutting panic patterns in the dark. In the confusion, Karen was shouting, "It's a power outage! Everyone remain calm! This is precisely the kind of infrastructure failure I've warned about." Someone near the front, Sarah, had her phone up and was recording. In the shaky light of a dozen cell phones, Karen's face was a mask of frustration and anger. "This is unacceptable. Our community deserves reliable services." That's when Steve's daughter stepped forward, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "It's not an infrastructure failure, Karen," she said, her phone's light shining directly on the flustered president. "My father's house still has power. So does Tom Carson's. So do 5 other homes on this block." A murmur went through the crowd. People started looking out the clubhouse windows, seeing the impossible. 7 homes lit up and glowing, while the rest of the neighborhood was dark. The reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't a grid failure. This was a demonstration. Karen sputtered, caught completely off guard. That's impossible. He dismantled that thing," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger in the vague direction of my house. "This is sabotage. He's illegally backfeeding the grid. He's endangering us all." But her accusations sounded hollow and desperate in the dark. The crowd wasn't listening to her anymore. They were watching the evidence with their own eyes. The lights worked, the power was on, but only for the chosen few. Steve's daughter didn't back down. "The only one endangering people around here is you," she said, her voice ringing with clarity and conviction. "You tried to force my father to get rid of the one thing that kept his oxygen machine running. You called him a liability. You just stood there and proved exactly why this neighborhood needs Tom Carson more than it needs you." It was a killing blow. The room, which had been buzzing with panic, went silent. In the dim light, you could see people turning to each other, whispering. The tables were turning, right there in the dark. Someone else recorded the whole exchange on their phone. Karen, fumbling with a weak flashlight, screeching about sabotage while Steve's daughter calmly dismantled her authority piece by piece. The walkout started slowly at first. One couple got up and left, then another. Within minutes, the clubhouse was half empty. The meeting was over. Karen was left standing in the dark, her gavel useless, her power extinguished as surely as the lights had been. The videos hit the neighborhood Facebook page within the hour. HOA president melts down in blackout. The clip of her calling Steve, a disabled veteran, a liability, went viral in our small community. The spell was broken. Karen Halbridge wasn't a powerful protector of property values. She was just a bully who'd been exposed, sputtering impotently in the dark. Karen didn't know how to retreat, only how to attack. The morning after the blackout, I found another notice taped to my front door. This one looked even more official than the last, printed on thick cardstock, with what looked like a photocopied county seal at the top. It was an emergency cease and desist order, demanding the immediate and permanent dismantlement of my illegal power grid, and citing half a dozen fictional state and federal statutes. It was signed K. Halbridge, HOA President and Community Safety Liaison. It was the desperate act of a cornered animal, a piece of paper meant to scare me back into submission. I just peeled it carefully off my door, slipped it into a plastic evidence bag, and smiled. She'd just handed me the last piece of proof I needed. I spent the morning at my desk, compiling my own file. I had the fraudulent legal notice, the photos of her and Greg trying to force their way onto my property, the audio recording of her threats, and the crown jewel, a crystal-clear video I'd taken of Greg Foster faking the decibel reading in my garage. Then, I drove down to City Hall. I didn't ask for a low-level clerk. I asked to speak to the head of the Planning and Inspection Department, the man who had ultimately signed off on my original permits. I laid my file out on his desk. He listened patiently, his expression growing more grim with each piece of evidence I presented. When I played the video of the fake noise test, he just shook his head slowly, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Falsification of a municipal compliance document, he muttered, more to himself than to me. That's a serious offense. He picked up his phone. Frank, he said, clear my schedule for the next hour, and get me a city-calibrated decibel meter from evidence lockup, the good one. 2 hours later, 2 vehicles pulled up to my house. The first was the city inspector's official truck. The second was a police car. Karen must have seen them arrive, because she was on her porch in seconds, watching with her arms crossed, a look of triumphant vindication on her face. She thought they were here for me. The city inspector, a no-nonsense man named Peterson, walked up to my open garage, followed by the police officer and Frank, the clerk I'd spoken to before. I already had the system running in its normal, whisper-quiet mode. Peterson didn't say a word to me. He just unlatched his professional-grade sound meter, calibrated it on the spot, and held it up about 5 feet from my inverter bank. The digital readout stabilized almost instantly, in 28 decibels. He moved it closer, in 30. He moved it to the other side of the garage, 26. He grunted, then turned to his colleague. For the record, he said, his voice loud enough for Karen to hear across the street. This reading is lower than the ambient noise of a quiet residential street. This is cleaner and quieter than most modern air conditioning units. He made a few notes on his official report, then walked straight across the street to Karen's house, with the police officer following a few steps behind. I watched from my driveway as he handed her a summons. Her face went from smug to confused to horrified in about 10 seconds. She was being formally charged. Falsification of municipal documents, a string of harassment complaints I'd filed with the evidence to back them up, and an official ethics breach complaint filed by the city against the HOA itself. Her phony legal documents and staged tests had backfired in the most public way imaginable. She was no longer the accuser. She was the accused. That afternoon, my grandson, a kid who knows more about the internet than I ever will, took the cell phone video of the blackout meeting and did a little editing. He added some simple text overlays. HOA President cuts power to residents' medical equipment, and veteran called a liability. He posted it on YouTube under the title, HOA Karen Loses It. After, veteran cuts power. He thought maybe a few neighbors would see it. By the next morning, it had 1,000 views. By evening, 10,000. Local news outlets started calling me. The story was simple, powerful, and infuriating. It had everything. A stubborn veteran, a life-saving invention, and a power-mad HOA president caught on camera having a meltdown. The tide in the neighborhood had turned completely. The fear Karen had cultivated for years was gone, replaced by a simmering anger. People were talking, they were organizing. An emergency petition was circulated, calling for a vote to remove Karen Halbridge as president and dissolve the current board. It got more than enough signatures in a single afternoon. The vote was scheduled for the following Saturday. Karen's reign was over. She just didn't know how to accept it yet. The kingdom she'd built on a foundation of petty fines and intimidation was about to be washed away by the very people she'd tried to control. On Saturday, the day of the HOA vote, I didn't go to the clubhouse. My fight was over. Now it was up to the neighbors to decide what kind of community they wanted to live in. Instead, I was at Steve's house. He'd come home from the hospital, weak but in good spirits, and his old wooden porch steps were getting harder for him to manage. So, I spent the morning with a skill saw and a drill, building him a sturdy wheelchair ramp. The clean scent of freshly cut lumber filled the air. As I was sinking the final screws, Steve's daughter came walking up the driveway, a wide grin on her face. "You're not going to believe it," she said, holding up her phone. 37-3, she's out. The entire board was dissolved. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. We had won. The community voted to self-govern for a 90-day period, while they figured out how to form a new, more sensible board. The reign of the clipboard was over. That night, my home's motion-activated security camera sent an alert to my phone. I tapped it open and saw a shadowy figure sneaking around the side of my house, heading for the garage. It was Karen. She was carrying something in her hand, a can of spray foam insulation. In her twisted mind, if she couldn't legislate my system out of existence, she would physically destroy it. She was trying to clog the inverter's cooling vents, an act that would cause the whole system to overheat and catastrophically fail. I didn't even have to get out of my chair. I just hit the call button on the app, and 2 minutes later, a police car rolled silently up to my curb. They caught her red-handed, foam can still in her hand, caught in the beam of a flashlight. This time, there was no warning, no summons. They cuffed her right there in my driveway. The list of charges was growing: trespassing, attempted vandalism, added to the fraud and harassment charges she was already facing from the city. A few weeks later, I was called to testify in court. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom battle. I just stood up, in my clean work shirt and jeans, and explained the facts. I calmly described how the microgrid worked, showed the judge the schematics and the permits, and explained how it had helped my neighbors during outages. When the prosecutor asked me about the blackout, I told the truth. I didn't cut power to the neighborhood, I said, looking the judge in the eye. That was a municipal grid failure, which happens from time to time. I only ever have control over my own system. On that particular night, I simply chose to turn my system on. The judge looked at Karen, whose face was a stony mask of denial, then back at me. The ruling was swift and decisive. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts. The judge ordered the old HOA to refund not only my $5,000 fine, but all the petty fines they had levied against other residents in the past year. They were also ordered to pay my legal costs and damages for the harassment. It was a complete and total victory. The first official act of the new, resident-led neighborhood council was to draft a new bylaw. They held the meeting on my front lawn, and people brought lawn chairs and coolers of drinks. The proposal was simple. It guaranteed the right of any homeowner to install and operate personal off-grid energy technology, as long as it met city code and didn't pose a public safety hazard. They passed it unanimously. Then, Mr. Miller, the man who'd been too afraid to sign my petition, stood up. "I think we should call it Tom's Rule," he said, and a cheer went up through the crowd. I just stood there, humbled and a little embarrassed, but proud. The change in the neighborhood was palpable. People were talking to each other again, waving from their yards, helping each other with projects. The fear was gone. To celebrate, the community decided to host a block party, right there on our cul-de-sac. They set up tables and grills and strings of lights, and the entire party, the music, the lights, the bounce house for the kids, the crockpots full of chili, was powered entirely by my microgrid. I ran a few heavy-duty extension cords from my garage, and the quiet, steady hum of the inverters provided all the electricity we needed. Kids were running around with sparklers, their laughter echoing in the warm evening air. Rachel stood next to me, her arm linked through mine, a peaceful smile on her face. At one point, Steve, leaning on his cane but standing tall, raised a plastic cup. "To Tom," he said, his voice strong and clear, "who showed us that real power isn't about yelling the loudest or writing the most rules. It's about keeping the lights on when everything else goes dark." Everyone cheered. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, all lit by the power that came from my garage, from a promise I made to my wife. It's a funny thing about power. The quieter it runs, the more people take it for granted, until the day you have to take it back.